Hello folks, welcome to the canal channel Jose. Today we're going to give you an idea how to replace a fuel filter on this 91 to 94 Toyota Tercel. And today we're going to give you an idea step by step on how we do it, and that way when you want to do it, you don't run into some problems. So today we're going to tell you and expose some of the info that you should do or not do when you're changing a fuel filter on a Toyota Tercel or any car. And with that said, let's get started. So as you're looking at your 91 to 94 Toyota Tercel, the fuel filter is right there. This is your master cylinder for the brakes, your airbox, and right there, which is this unit, but right in there, which is dull, this is shiny, is your fuel filter. That one right there. This is your canister for evap system, and right next to it is your fuel filter. So we're gonna clean a little bit around it so you can see how to do it and you get a better idea on what we done. So in case you don't need to remove all this stuff, so you just get to see how we do it. So we're gonna expose as much as we can. What we're gonna be doing is we're gonna take this area of the air duct on our intake off, and we're gonna disconnect these two vacuum lines off of the intake and take this part off of it, and we're gonna undo it from right this area 10 millimeter and take this out so we can start exposing the fuel filter. What we have done is we disconnected our air temperature sensor, the two vacuum lines from this area. We disconnected or loosened in this clamp, so now we can remove this whole box out of the way, and just be careful with this hose that's get attached here. So you just gotta be careful with that. We remove that to get to the fuel filter. So now without the air intake tube, we can see that the fuel filter is right in there, as you can see. And it's this unit, and it's sitting like this, right in there. So that's the old one, we're putting this one in. So now what we're gonna be doing as well is we're gonna remove this bottom piece of the intake box, so that way we can get more working space underneath. That way we can take the fuel filter out easier and expose a little bit more. So, and maybe you don't need to do this. We're doing this to expose more info as much as we can. And those three bolts inside there, they are 12 millimeters to take them out. And it's good once in a while to take this part off and shake it off, because there's sand, debris that stays on the bottom. So that can become part of the clogging the system on the filter in the future. So if you do once in a while the cleaning and not just the changing the filter, this is going to prolong the life on the filter. So we do this for maintenance purpose. So that way we start with a fresh air box, and then that way we help the filter to stay cleaner for longer. So now that we have this area cleaner, we're gonna take this canister out so we can have more working room down there. So we're gonna take this hose up here, take the clamp off, take that hose off. This little hose, or this vacuum hose, goes into this area over here. And we're gonna take the bottom hose off from the canister and then loosen that bolt. It looks like a 10 millimeter, so that way we can take the canister off and we can work on that fuel filter in there, because that's almost next to it, on top of it. So we can get that out and we can have a more cleaner working area. So we're taking the two hoses, the two upper hoses and the bottom hose for the canister. We have taken them off. So now we loosen this bolt so we can hold our canister. When you're taking the canister bracket off, what you want to do is you want to make sure that when you're loosening this bolt, there's a nut and it's not welded to the bracket. So you want to be sure when you're loosening this, not to lose the nut, and then say both of these and put them aside, because now we can take the canister off. And if you lose that nut, you're gonna have to look for another 10 millimeter or somehow to tighten that back up when you're putting it back up. So now we can take the canister off and we put this aside. So this is how the canister looks like, the bottom hose and the two upper hoses. So the job of this guy is to process all the fumes and help to uh, burn them correctly. So this guy does and purifies the air and the fumes so they don't get released into the environment just like that. So this is part of the burning or getting rid of the fumes the most right way. So this guy is that's what he's done. That's his job. It has charcoal inside here. So this is the canister. Now we still have the fuel filter here and we have the bracket for the canister, and we're going to be taking this out. And for us, we're doing this all this work so you can we can expose as much as we can on how we're doing this fuel filter replacement so you can do it better or faster with less problems at home. So we're going to take this one off so we can clear a little bit more on the side, so that way we can work on it better. So to take the bracket off, what we have to do is we have to press this tab here and slide this whole ring or bracket straight up. This is so it doesn't slide up and down and come off of that rail. So we push it back and then slide it up. So the time to take off the filter comes, and now this filter has a nut shape on the bottom and it says in. So this is the inlet and this is the outlet going into the engine. As you can see, there says out. But the thing is that we're going to show you that it requires a 90mm wrench to hold it while we take off the top and bottom fluid line for the gasoline. But you cannot use on those nuts, on that nut or the bottom one, you cannot just use an open wrench. We recommend you use a flare wrench, which is this flare nut wrench. The bottom requires a 14mm and the top a 17mm. So what you do is you put a 19mm wrench on the bottom like this. You hold the filter, and that's gonna be your point to hold the filter from spinning while you take off the top and the bottom flare nut, because you cannot put it too easy on the top because it doesn't slide underneath this plate. So we're gonna use it on the bottom. So only the open wrench for that to hold it, but you want to use the 14mm for the bottom nut and 17mm for the top with a flare nut wrench, so that way you don't crush or damage the bolt and the nut on the bottom. Okay. So now what we have done is we disconnected the speedometer cable so we can expose more of what's going on. So that way you don't have to do all this. It's just for us to show you how to get to those two, the top nut and the bottom nut, or the top bolt and the bottom nut, to take them apart. We're just doing that for showing you purpose. So now what we went through is that we have put the 21mm open range into the filter or the fuel filter, and then we have put a 17mm socket into it so we can take off that bolt from the filter. So that's a better deal because the flare nut wrench is a little harder to do on the top one. So you want to use a 17mm socket on top, and then the bottom will go with the other wrench. So we'll show you how we take the top off. Okay folks, so this is how it looks. This bolt has a hole in there, but that hole comes through this side, so liquid comes this way through the filter, and then it goes through the bolt, and then it sends out into the fuel line that goes to the engine. But it has between this metal piece and the bolt, there's a washer, copper washer, and then there's another copper washer between this piece and the filter. So now we're going to expose and kind of show you what the bottom piece looks like. You see that nut, that flyer nut that is right there, that's the one we have to take off from the filter, and that's a 14 millimeter flare nut. So we use a 14 millimeter flare nut to take that one off. And it's a little harder to show because it's right where the transmission meets the block. We cannot get the camera too well in there, so we take that off now. So now we put our 21 millimeter wrench on top, and then we get our 14 millimeter flare nut wrench on the bottom. And once we set it, we have to turn to loosen it. So we have to, now we'll have to look backwards because we're on the opposite side of loosening and tightening it. So we got to make sure we're spinning it the right way. So now we loosen it and then take it off. So now what we have to do is we have to remove that 10 millimeter bolt and this other 10 millimeter bolt right there, so we can get the whole bracket away from the firewall, and the filter comes with it. Once we remove the top and bottom hose or lines, so we can start getting the filter out and start putting the new one into the bracket. Now we have to get off. We're gonna use this rag to see how much crap he had. Look at all the stuff, that's bad. So this filter needs to be replaced. So now we're gonna take this one out of this bracket and then put a new one, tighten it, and put it back into the car. So now to take this filter from this bracket, we have to loosen this 10 millimeter long bolt that goes along the bracket, loosen it, and take this filter off, put the new one, it's snuggy. This bracket is like this, and you wanna make sure that you put this filter with this plate away from the firewall. So there's a groove right here, a high point. There's another high point right here. There's another high point right here. So we're gonna slide it right into this bracket like this, and those high points have to fall one there, another one there, and another one there. And this plate, this neck, has to be pointing away from the firewall. So that right there tell us that we slide it right there and then tighten it right there. We slide it in there, and then we put the driver's side in. We just snug it so we can have play, so we can tighten or put on the bottom line that feeds the fuel filter, and then we can tighten it against the firewall. But we have to make sure that the bottom piece goes in first. One thing is that this bottom line, fuel line, you want to make sure when you start threading it, you give it a lot of threads by hand, because this is a flare. And if this doesn't seal right, or you put it wrong and you tighten it wrong and you damage it, you're going to have some serious problems. So you want to make sure that this, especially this, goes in and threads in a lot of times, and you tighten it really good. But don't tighten it, don't force it on the first two threads. Make sure that it goes in really well. That's how it seals into the filter inside. It doesn't seal by the threads of the nut. It goes because of the flare. Now that we have the fuel filter attached to the bottom fuel line, we have attached it and snug it into the firewall so we can tighten in both 10 millimeters bolts, so that anchors it to the frame. So then we can start tightening in the bottom and putting up the top fuel line. So we have the filter attached to the firewall. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to tighten the bottom fuel line first, and then we'll come up and start putting the top one. So with our 14 millimeter flare nut wrench, we tighten the bottom one. So now that we have tightened the bottom fuel line, now we start putting the top one, and now the filter is rigid to the frame. So that's going to help us hold the filter while we start tightening in these fuel lines. So now we have the bolt, copper washer, fuel line fitting, copper washer, and then now we can start threading this into the fuel filter, so that way these two copper washers are going to be creating the seal between the two metals. So we put this now. That's the sequence. Tightening the bolt with a 70 millimeter socket. So right here we can test if this fuel filter is gonna leak or not. We tighten the bottom and the top fuel line, so we can actually turn on our car to see if that pressure is gonna create any leak on this filter. So we can turn on our car. So now we have verified that our car can create pressure and don't have any leaks at the fuel filter. So now we have put the fuel lines in, so we can start putting everything back on before we start putting everything back on. And then we find that we have a leak, so we have to verify that before we move on. So we run our car, there is no fuel line leak, so now we can start putting everything back on. So next thing is to put the bracket or the canister back on, so we can put the canister and connect the hoses and start working ourselves backwards. So now we have just barely sitting there, so it's still loose. So what we have to do is we put the hoses back on, and then we tighten it once we have to face it into which way it needs to go. So now what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna attach the speedometer cable to the transmission, and we took that out so we can expose more of the fuel filter. You guys probably don't have to do that, but we did that so just to show you. So now we have put everything back together. So we have all the hoses, all the clamps together, air temperature sensor plugged in. So now we can turn on our car and verify that there's no check engine light on the dash. So now we have our engine running just normal. We have no fuel leaks, and we verified that on the beginning before putting everything back on. So now that we have everything back on, we can drive our car back on the road. And well, folks, hopefully this video was useful and helpful and give you an idea how to replace the fuel filter on your Toyota Tercel, and the procedures for the Paseo are almost the same. So there's a couple things that might change, but the procedures are very similar. So we use the Duralast brand, and the part number is FF636DL. So that's the part number that we use on our Toyota Tercel. And as we show, we took more components out to try to get you a really good look into it on what we were doing to replace that fuel filter, because sometimes you don't have to remove all those components. You might be able to just do it by removing maybe the airbox or some of the a smaller amount of components, but we went beyond so you could get a better look into it because it's really hidden. So that way you can get an idea what you need to do, and that way if it works for you the way we did it, or you can find out any other way that you can do it. So with that said, we show the tools and an idea of what tools we use, and pretty much just having the part available. And once you start doing this procedure, you don't want to mess with the key and opening and try to turn the key on once you start disconnecting the fuel lines, because what's going to happen is all the fuel is just going to splash everywhere, and then the fuel pump is going to try to pressurize the system. But if there's no pressure buildup, that the pump is not going to shut off, and it's going to be fuel spill everywhere. So don't mess with the key anymore once you start disconnecting the fuel lines. So with that said, folks, for our friends who are watching our video, haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. If you like our video, give us thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here en el canal El Chano Jose.